The day the aliens came to Earth, Danny Hartwell was flipping pancakes in a small diner in Nebraska. He heard the news on the old radio that sat on the kitchen counter. A massive ship had landed in New York. The creatures inside called themselves the Drakari, and they looked like dragons from old fairy tales. Danny did not stop cooking. He had orders to fill, and hungry truckers did not care about aliens, but 3 weeks later the aliens came looking for him. Well, not him exactly. They came looking for any human chef brave enough or foolish enough to take a job that no one wanted. The Drakari Empire had sent a diplomatic vessel to discuss peace between their species and humanity. On board were 3 princes, sons of the Drakari Emperor himself. These princes needed to be fed during the long negotiations, and they demanded a human chef. They wanted to taste the food of the species they might soon rule over. The problem was simple. The Drakari had already killed 7 chefs who failed to please them. Some were burned alive. Others were eaten. The princes were cruel, proud, and impossible to satisfy. Every famous chef on Earth refused the job. Michelin star winners said no. Celebrity cooks from television said no. Even brave military cooks said no. The United Nations sent out a desperate call. They needed someone, anyone, willing to cook for the dragon princes. Danny heard about it from a customer at the diner. The old man shook his head and said it was a death sentence. No human could survive those monsters. Danny thought about it while he cleaned the grill that night. He thought about his grandmother, who had raised him after his parents died. She always said that food was magic. She said a good meal could fix a broken heart, end a fight between neighbors, and bring enemies together at the same table. She believed that no creature, no matter how mean, could resist the power of a home-cooked meal made with love. Danny missed his grandmother. She had passed away 2 years ago, leaving him alone in the world. He had no wife, no children, no family left. He had nothing but his cooking and the little diner that barely paid his rent. He made a decision that night. He called the number on the news and volunteered. The government officials thought he was joking at first. Then they thought he was crazy. They sent doctors to check his mental health. They sent soldiers to make sure he understood the danger. They showed him pictures of the previous chefs, or what was left of them. Danny looked at the pictures and felt sick. But he did not change his mind. He signed the papers and packed a small bag with his grandmother's old recipe book and his favorite kitchen knife. They flew him to New York on a military jet. The Drakari ship sat in Central Park like a mountain made of black glass. It was bigger than any building Danny had ever seen. Fires burned along its surface and smoke rose into the gray sky. Armed soldiers surrounded it, but they looked like ants next to the massive vessel. Danny walked toward the ship alone. His legs were shaking, but he kept moving forward. A door opened in the side of the ship, and hot air rushed out, carrying a smell like burning metal and something else, something alive and dangerous. A woman met him at the entrance. She was human, thin and tired-looking, with dark circles under her eyes. Her name was Kira Moss, and she explained that she had lived among the Drakari for 5 years as a translator. She knew their language, their customs, and their cruelty better than anyone. Kira looked at Danny with pity in her eyes. She told him the truth as they walked through the dark corridors of the ship. The 3 princes were named Voreth, Zelen, and Kiris. Voreth was the eldest and the most dangerous. He enjoyed watching humans suffer. Zelen was the middle child, cruel in a lazy way, always bored and looking for entertainment. Kiris was the youngest, quieter than his brothers, but still a dragon prince who had never shown mercy to anyone. Danny listened and nodded. He asked Kira what the princes liked to eat. Kira stopped walking and stared at him. No one had ever asked that question before. The previous chefs had been too scared to think clearly. They had simply cooked their best dishes and hoped for the best. It never worked. Danny said that was the problem. A good chef did not cook what he wanted to make. A good chef cooked what the customer wanted to eat. He needed to understand the princes before he could feed them properly. Kira did not know what to say. She led him deeper into the ship, past guards who stood 3 meters tall with scales like armor and eyes like burning coals. They looked at Danny the way a cat looks at a mouse. Danny kept his eyes forward and followed Kira. The kitchen was a nightmare. It was a massive room filled with strange machines, tanks of living creatures, and shelves of ingredients that Danny could not identify. Some of the things in the tanks were still moving. Some of the spices smelled like poison. The heat was unbearable, and the light came from flames that burned without fuel along the walls. Kira told him this was where he would work and live. His room was a small space connected to the kitchen, barely big enough for a bed. She told him the princes would expect their first meal tomorrow at sunrise. She wished him luck and left him alone. Danny stood in the middle of the alien kitchen and took a deep breath. The air burned his throat. His hands were sweating. His heart was beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. Then he did what he always did when he felt lost. He started cleaning. He organized the strange tools. He examined the ingredients one by one, smelling them, touching them, trying to understand what they were. He found things that reminded him of Earth food. One spice smelled like pepper. One creature looked like a fish. One vegetable felt like a potato. He worked through the night, learning the kitchen, making it his own. By the time the first light crept through the small window, he had a plan. It was not a good plan. It was probably a stupid plan. But it was something. Danny Hartwell, a nobody from Nebraska, was about to cook breakfast for dragon princes who had killed every chef before him. He was scared. He was alone. But he was also hungry for a challenge. He put on his apron, picked up his knife, and got to work. His grandmother had been right about one thing. Food was magic. And Danny was about to find out if his magic was strong enough to tame 3 dragons. Danny carried the first meal into the dining hall on a silver tray. His hands were steady, even though his heart was not. The room was enormous, with ceilings so high they disappeared into darkness. A long table made of black stone sat in the center, and 3 figures waited at the far end. The princes were terrifying. They were not fully dragon and not fully human. They stood on 2 legs like men, but their bodies were covered in scales that shimmered like metal. Their faces were long and sharp, with golden eyes that glowed in the dim light. Wings folded against their backs, and their claws clicked against the stone floor as they shifted in their seats. Vorath, the eldest, was the largest. His scales were dark red, almost black, and scars covered his arms and chest. He looked at Danny the way someone looks at an insect. Zelen sat to his right, leaner and covered in green scales that caught the light. He was picking at his claws with a bored expression, not even looking at Danny. Russ was the smallest, with scales of deep blue. He watched Danny approach with curious eyes, tilting his head slightly like a bird examining something new. Danny placed the tray on the table and stepped back. He had made a simple dish using the ingredients that reminded him most of Earth food. It was a soup, rich and dark, with chunks of the fish-like creature and the potato-like vegetable. He had seasoned it with the spice that smelled like pepper and added a touch of something sweet he had found in a jar. Vorath leaned forward and sniffed the bowl. His nostrils flared and smoke curled from his nose. Then he tasted it. The room was silent for 3 seconds. Then Vorath opened his mouth and released a stream of fire that melted the bowl and scorched the table. Danny jumped backward, feeling the heat wash over his face. Kira, who stood by the door, let out a small cry of fear. Vorath stood up, his massive body blocking the light. He declared that the food was garbage. He said it was fit only for slaves and animals. He asked Danny if he was trying to insult the royal family of the Drakari Empire. Danny's mind went blank for a moment. He thought about running. He thought about begging for his life. He thought about all the chefs who had died in this exact room. Then he thought about his grandmother. She would not have run. She would have asked questions. Danny took a breath and spoke. He asked Vorath what was wrong with the dish. He asked what flavors the prince actually enjoyed. He asked what textures pleased the Drakari tongue. He asked what a good meal meant to a dragon prince. The room went silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Vorath stared at Danny with an expression that might have been shock. No servant had ever spoken to him like that. No human had ever asked him what he wanted instead of simply trying to please him. Zelen laughed. He thought Danny was either very brave or very stupid. He suggested they roast him slowly and find out which one. but Kiris raised his hand and his brothers fell quiet. The youngest prince leaned forward, his golden eyes fixed on Danny. He said no chef had ever asked that question before. He said they had all assumed they knew what dragons wanted. They had all been wrong, Vorith snarled and told Kiris to be quiet. But Kiris ignored him. He spoke directly to Danny, his voice softer than his brother's. Kiris said that when he was young, before his mother died, she used to cook for him. She made a dish that was warm and sweet, with a spice that reminded him of something Earth humans called cinnamon. He had not tasted anything like it since her death. Every chef had tried and failed because they did not understand. It was not about the ingredients. It was about the feeling, the memory, the love. Danny listened carefully. He asked more questions. He asked about the texture, the color, the smell. He asked how it made Kiris feel when he ate it. He asked if it was served hot or cold, in the morning or at night. Vorith grew impatient. He told Danny he had 3 days to make something acceptable, or he would be fed to the fire pits. Then he stormed out of the room, his heavy footsteps shaking the floor. Zelen followed, still looking bored. KY Russ stayed for a moment longer. He told Danny that he was different from the other chefs. He said it like it was a question, not a compliment. Then he left too. Kira rushed to Danny's side. She asked if he was insane. She said no one talked to the princes like that and lived. Danny just smiled and said he had work to do. He returned to the kitchen and began to experiment. He did not sleep for the next 3 days. He burned his hands on alien flames. He tasted compounds that made his tongue go numb. He mixed ingredients that should not go together and discovered new flavors that no human had ever experienced. He thought about Kiris and his mother. He thought about the warmth and sweetness the young prince remembered. He searched the kitchen for anything that might create that feeling. On the second day, he found it. Hidden in the back of a storage room was a jar of golden powder that smelled faintly like cinnamon and honey. It was labeled in the Drakari language, and when Danny asked a passing servant about it, the servant looked frightened. He said it was a spice from the old world, from before the Drakari became warriors. No one used it anymore because it was considered weak and sentimental. Danny took the jar and smiled. On the morning of the 4th day, he carried a new tray into the dining hall. The 3 princes sat waiting, and Vorith already had smoke rising from his nostrils. Danny placed a small bowl in front of Kiris first. It was a simple dish, almost like a pudding, golden and soft. Steam rose from it, carrying a scent that filled the room. Kiris froze. His eyes went wide, and for a moment he looked less like a dragon prince and more like a lost child. He picked up the spoon with a trembling claw and tasted the dish. Tears ran down his scaled face. He did not make a sound, but his whole body shook. Vorith and Zelen stared at their brother in shock. They had never seen him show emotion before. KY Russ looked at Danny and whispered one word. He said it was perfect. Vorith demanded to know what trick Danny had used. Danny simply said it was not a trick. He said he had listened. He had paid attention. He had cooked with feeling instead of just skill. Zelen grabbed the bowl and tasted it himself. His expression changed. For just a second, his bored mask slipped, and something like wonder crossed his face. Even Vorith, after much hesitation, tried the dish. He did not cry like Kiris, he did not show wonder like Zelen, but he did not burn anything either. He set down the spoon and looked at Danny with new eyes. He told Danny that he had earned another day, but he warned him not to think he had won anything. This was just the beginning. Danny bowed and returned to the kitchen. Kira followed him, her mouth hanging open. She asked how he had done it. Danny shrugged and said his grandmother had taught him well. Food was not about showing off. It was about making people feel something. Even dragons, it turned out, had feelings they had forgotten about. He started preparing for the next meal, knowing the real challenge was just beginning. He had made the princes curious. Now he had to make them trust him, and somewhere deep in his heart, Danny felt something he had not felt in a long time: hope. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Danny had ever experienced. The 3 princes, instead of killing him, began to challenge him. They turned his cooking into a game, a competition that tested every skill he had and forced him to learn new ones. Vorith was the cruelest in his demands. He asked Danny to create a dish that tasted like victory in battle. He wanted to eat something that captured the feeling of fire and blood and triumph. It was an impossible request, and Vorith knew it. He wanted Danny to fail, but Danny did not fail. He spent 2 days thinking about what victory meant. He asked Drakari soldiers about their greatest battles. He learned about the heat of combat, the rush of adrenaline, the satisfaction of survival. Then he created a dish that was hot and fierce, with layers of flavor that hit the tongue in waves, building to a peak that left the mouth burning in the best way. Vorith tasted it and said nothing. That silence was the highest praise Danny had received from him. Zellen's challenges were different. He was bored with everything, so he asked for the impossible just to see Danny struggle. He demanded a dish that changed flavor as you ate it. He wanted surprise, entertainment, something that would finally make him feel interested in food again. Danny created a small cake with 7 layers, each one a different taste that revealed itself only after the previous layer was finished. Sweet became sour. Sour became spicy. Spicy became bitter, then savory, then something floral, and finally a warmth that spread through the whole body. Zellen ate the entire thing and then asked for another. Kiris was gentler with his requests. He asked Danny to cook dishes that reminded him of emotions. He wanted to taste peace. He wanted to taste hope. He wanted to taste the feeling of coming home after a long journey. These were the hardest challenges of all because they required Danny to understand not just cooking, but the Drakari soul. Danny succeeded more often than he failed. And with each success, something changed in the way the princes looked at him. They began to respect him, not as an equal, but as something valuable. Something rare. Word of the human chef spread through the ship. The common Drakari, the soldiers and servants who kept the vessel running, began to whisper about him. They said he had magic in his hands. They said he could cook food that made dragons cry. One night, while Danny was working late in the kitchen, a young Drakari soldier appeared at the door. He was smaller than most of his kind, with dull brown scales that marked him as low-born. He looked terrified, but he held out a small token and asked Danny for a favor. The soldier explained that his clutchmate, the Drakari word for brother, was sick in the medical bay. The healer said there was nothing wrong with his body, but he had stopped eating weeks ago. He had lost the will to live after their third clutchmate died in a training accident. The soldier begged Danny to make something, anything, that might bring his brother back to life. Danny looked at the young soldier and saw something familiar. He saw grief. He saw desperation. He saw the same pain Danny had felt when his grandmother died. He told the soldier to come back in 1 hour. Danny worked quickly. He did not have access to the ingredients the princes received, but he made do with what was available. He created a simple broth, warm and mild, seasoned with herbs that had a calming effect on Drakari nerves. It was not fancy. It was not impressive. But it was made with care. The soldier took the bowl to his brother. The next morning, he returned to the kitchen with tears in his golden eyes. His brother had eaten. It was not much, just a few sips, but it was the first food he had accepted in weeks. The soldier thanked Danny and promised to repay him someday. That was the beginning of something Danny had not expected. More Drakari came to him in the following nights. They came in secret, afraid of what the princes might say, but they came. A female warrior asked for something to ease the pain in her old wounds. A young servant wanted to know what human food tasted like. An elderly cook, the only Drakari who had ever worked in a kitchen, came to ask Danny questions about his methods. Danny fed them all. He learned their names, their stories, their hopes, and their fears. He discovered that the common Drakari were nothing like their princes. They were tired of war. They were tired of conquest. They were tired of watching their children die in endless battles for glory they did not want. Kira watched all of this with growing amazement. She told Danny he was playing a dangerous game. If the princes found out he was feeding the servants without permission, they would be furious. Danny just smiled and kept cooking, but Kira was right about the danger. Vorith had spies everywhere, and he soon learned what Danny was doing. The eldest prince summoned Danny to his private chambers one evening. The room was dark and hot. filled with trophies from Vorath's many victories. Skulls of various species lined the walls. Weapons hung on display. In the center of the room, Vorath sat on a throne made of black stone. His red eyes fixed on Danny. Vorath told Danny that he knew about the secret meals. He said Danny had been feeding the servants like they were pets. He asked Danny why he would waste his talent on worthless, low-born soldiers. Danny answered honestly. He said they were hungry and he was a chef. His job was to feed people. It did not matter if they were princes or servants. Hungry was hungry. Vorath stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound, but it was still a laugh. He told Danny he was the strangest human he had ever met. Most humans begged and cried and tried to save themselves. Danny just kept cooking. The prince warned Danny not to forget his place. He was still a servant, still property of the Drakari Empire. But Vorath would allow the secret meals to continue for now. It kept the crew happy and productive, which served the Empire. Danny bowed and thanked the prince. He returned to the kitchen feeling both relieved and uneasy. Vorath had allowed the meals, but he had also shown Danny something important. The prince was watching everything. He was always calculating, always planning. Danny began to watch back. He paid attention to the conversations he overheard, the way the princes spoke to each other, the tension that sometimes crackled between them. He noticed that Kiris often looked sad when his brothers were not watching. He noticed that Zelen sometimes seemed afraid of Vorath. He noticed that Vorath smiled most when others were suffering. Something was wrong on this ship. Something deeper than cruel princes and scared servants. Danny could feel it in the air, in the way people spoke in whispers, in the way guards looked over their shoulders. He did not know what it was yet. But he knew he needed to find out. In the meantime, he kept cooking. Every meal was a small act of rebellion, a tiny flame of kindness in a ship full of darkness. The Drakari crew began to look at him differently. They nodded to him in the hallways. They saved the best ingredients for him. They warned him when Vorath was in a bad mood. Danny was building something without meaning to. He was building loyalty, one plate at a time, and somewhere in the depths of the ship, in the dark places where secrets lived, that loyalty would soon be tested. The summons came at midnight. A guard arrived at Danny's small room and told him that Prince Vorath demanded his presence immediately. Danny dressed quickly and followed the guard through the dark corridors of the ship. This time, they did not go to Vorath's trophy room. They went deeper, to a part of the ship Danny had never seen before. The walls here were older, rougher, covered in symbols that glowed faintly with red light. The air was thick and hard to breathe. Vorath waited in a small chamber at the end of a long hallway. He was alone, which was unusual. The prince always had guards nearby. Danny felt a chill run down his spine as the door closed behind him. Vorath told Danny to sit. His voice was calm, almost friendly, which made it even more frightening. Danny sat on a small stool and waited. The prince began to speak. He said he had been watching Danny for weeks. He said Danny was smarter than he pretended to be. He said Danny understood things that other humans did not. Things about power, about loyalty, about how the universe really worked. Danny said nothing. He just listened. Vorath told him the truth about the peace negotiations. There would be no peace. There never was going to be peace. The treaty was a trick, a way to get close to Earth without fighting. Once the human leaders signed the agreement, the Drakari fleet would arrive. Earth would be conquered in a matter of days. Humanity would become slaves of the Empire, workers and servants for the Drakari for the next 1,000 years. Danny felt sick. He thought about his diner in Nebraska, about the truckers who came for breakfast, about the small town where he grew up. He thought about all the humans on Earth who had no idea what was coming. Vorath saw the fear in Danny's eyes and smiled. He said there was nothing Danny could do to stop it. The invasion was already planned. The fleet was already on its way. But Vorath was offering Danny a choice, a way to save himself and everyone he cared about. Danny asked what Vorath wanted. The prince leaned forward, his red eyes burning in the dim light. He explained that he was tired of sharing power with his brothers. Kiris was weak and sentimental. Zelen was lazy and unreliable. Vorath wanted to rule alone. He wanted to lead the invasion himself and take all the glory for conquering Earth. He wanted Danny to poison his brothers. Danny's blood went cold. He asked Vorith why he would trust a human with something so important. Vorith laughed and said he did not trust Danny at all. He trusted Danny's fear. He trusted Danny's desire to survive. He said if Danny did this, his family would be spared when the invasion came. His hometown would be protected. Danny himself would be rewarded with a position of comfort in the new order. But if Danny refused, Vorith would kill him slowly. And then he would personally burn Nebraska to ashes when the fleet arrived. Danny asked for time to think. Vorith gave him 3 days. He said the royal feast was scheduled for the end of the week, a celebration before the negotiations concluded. That would be the perfect time. Danny would prepare a magnificent meal, and hidden in the food would be a poison that only affected Drakari royalty. Kiris and Zelen would die, and Vorith would blame it on human treachery. The invasion would proceed ahead of schedule, with Vorith as the sole commander. Danny returned to his room and did not sleep that night. He sat on his bed, staring at the wall, thinking about everything he had learned. Kira found him in the morning. She could see something was wrong, but Danny did not tell her the truth. He said he had a lot on his mind and he needed to prepare for the feast. For the next 3 days, Danny cooked. He worked harder than he had ever worked before. He created dishes that were works of art, each one more beautiful than the last. The kitchen staff watched in amazement as he transformed simple ingredients into something magical, but Danny was also thinking. He was planning. He was remembering every story he had heard from the Drakari crew, every piece of their culture he had learned, every law and tradition Kira had explained to him. On the second night, he asked the elderly cook a question. He asked about the old recipes, the ones from before the Drakari became warriors. The cook was surprised but answered. She told Danny about the sacred dishes, the ones prepared only for special ceremonies. One recipe in particular caught his attention. It was called the Feast of Truth. According to ancient law, it was a dish that could only be served when someone was accused of treason. The ingredients were blessed by tradition, and anyone who ate it while telling a lie would be exposed before all witnesses. The law was old and almost forgotten, but it had never been removed from the Drakari code. Danny asked the cook if she could get him the ingredients. She looked at him with wise old eyes and did not ask why. She simply nodded. On the day of the feast, Danny entered the great hall carrying the most impressive meal he had ever created. The room was filled with important Drakari, generals and nobles who had come to witness the final days of the peace negotiations. The 3 princes sat at the head of the table, with Vorith in the center. Kira stood near the door, watching nervously. She knew something was happening, but Danny had not told her what. Danny served each dish personally. He placed the food in front of Kiris first, then Zelen, then Vorith. The eldest prince looked at him with a knowing smile. He thought Danny had obeyed. He thought his brothers were about to die. The princes ate. The nobles ate. The whole room enjoyed the magnificent feast. When the last dish was finished, Vorith stood up. He was ready to make his move. He was ready to act surprised when his brothers began to die. He was ready to blame the human and start the invasion early. But nothing happened. Kiris and Zelen looked fine. They looked better than fine. They were smiling and relaxed, enjoying the meal like they had not enjoyed anything in years. Vorith's expression changed. His smile disappeared. He turned to Danny and demanded to know what had gone wrong. Danny reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. It was a recording chip he had borrowed from Kira. He had been wearing it during his secret meeting with Vorith 3 nights ago. Every word the prince had said about the invasion, about the murder of his brothers, about the betrayal of humanity was stored on that chip. Danny pressed a button, and Vorith's voice filled the great hall. The words echoed off the walls as every Drakari in the room heard. Their prince confessed to treason. Vorith roared in fury and lunged at Danny, but the guards did not help him. They stood still, watching because they had eaten the sacred dish. They were bound by ancient law to witness the truth. Danny spoke calmly. He explained what he had cooked. He named the sacred recipe and cited the ancient law. He said that by Drakari tradition, Vorath had been exposed as a traitor to his own family. The law was clear. The punishment was death. Kiris rose slowly from his seat. His face was pale, and his golden eyes were full of pain. He looked at his brother, the brother he had feared and admired his whole life, and he saw a monster. Zelen stood beside him, no longer bored, no longer lazy. His green scales seemed to glow with anger. Vorath screamed that it was a trick, that the human had manipulated them all. But it was too late. The law had been invoked. The witnesses had heard. The truth had been served on a silver plate. Danny stepped back and watched as the Drakari guards finally moved. They surrounded Vorath, their weapons drawn. The eldest prince fought, but even he could not defeat his own army. Justice was coming, and Danny had cooked it himself. The execution of Prince Vorath took place at dawn the next day. Danny did not watch. He stayed in his kitchen, cleaning pots and organizing ingredients, trying to forget the sounds that echoed through the ship. Drakari justice was swift and brutal. The eldest prince was given to the flames he had loved so much. When it was over, Kira came to find Danny. Her eyes were red, and her hands were shaking. She had lived among the Drakari for 5 years, but she had never seen anything like what happened at the feast. She asked Danny how he had known about the sacred recipe. She asked how he had planned everything so perfectly. Danny admitted that he had not planned everything. He had made most of it up as he went along. He had listened to stories, asked questions, and paid attention to the details that others ignored. His grandmother had taught him that the secret to cooking was understanding people. The same thing, it turned out, applied to defeating them. Kira laughed through her tears and called Danny the most dangerous cook in the galaxy. 3 days later, Danny was summoned to the throne room. The space looked different now. The darkness that had seemed so heavy before had lifted somehow. Sunlight streamed through windows that Danny had never noticed were there. Prince Zelen stood to one side of the room. He looked different too. The bored expression was gone, replaced by something more thoughtful, more serious. He nodded at Danny when their eyes met. A gesture of respect that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. In the center of the room, sitting on the throne, was Prince Kiris. The youngest prince had become the new emperor of the Drakari. The crown looked heavy on his head, but he wore it with dignity. Kiris thanked Danny for saving his life. He thanked him for exposing the truth about Vorath. He thanked him for something else too, something harder to explain. Danny had reminded Kiris what food was supposed to be about. It was not about power or showing off. It was about bringing people together. It was about making others feel loved. Danny accepted the thanks, but said he had only done what any decent person would do. He said he just cooked. The Drakari did the rest themselves by honoring their own laws. Kira smiled at that. He said Danny was being modest, but he would let it pass. Then the Emperor announced his first official decisions. The invasion of Earth was cancelled. The fleet that had been gathering at the edge of the solar system was ordered to return home. The peace treaty would be rewritten, not as a trick to conquer humanity, but as a genuine agreement between equals. Earth would become an ally of the Drakari Empire, not a servant. Zelen spoke up and said he would be the one to deliver the news to Earth. He wanted to apologize personally for his role in supporting Vorath's plans. He said he had been a coward who followed his cruel brother out of fear. He was done being a coward. Danny was surprised by this. He had expected Zelen to be glad Vorath was gone, but he had not expected genuine remorse. Maybe there was hope for the middle prince after all. Kiris then made another announcement. He offered Danny a permanent position as the royal chef of the Drakari Empire. He would have the finest kitchen in the galaxy, unlimited ingredients from 1,000 worlds, and the honor of cooking for emperors and nobles for the rest of his life. Danny considered the offer for a long moment. It was everything a chef could dream of. It was more than he had ever imagined for himself. But when he closed his eyes, he did not see magnificent kitchens or exotic ingredients. He saw a small diner in Nebraska. He saw the regulars who came every morning for coffee. He saw the faded photograph of his grandmother hanging on the wall. Danny thanked the Emperor for the offer, but he said he had to decline. He had a place back on Earth that needed him. It was not fancy, and it was not important to anyone but him, but it was home.ky. Russ did not seem surprised. He said he had expected Danny to say that. A man who cooked with the kind of love Danny showed would never abandon his roots. But the Emperor had one more request. He asked Danny to train a team of Drakari cooks before he left. He wanted them to learn the human way of cooking, the way that focused on feelings instead of just technique. He wanted that knowledge to spread through the Empire so that his people might learn to connect through food the way humans did. Danny agreed to that. He spent the next month teaching everything he knew. He showed the Drakari cooks how to taste with their hearts as well as their tongues. He taught them about improvisation, about creativity, about the courage to try new things and fail and try again. Most importantly, he taught them that the best ingredient in any dish was love. The day Danny left the Drakari ship was bright and clear. A shuttle was waiting to take him back to Earth. A crowd had gathered to see him off. Dozens of Drakari soldiers and servants who had become his friends during his time on the ship. The elderly cook was there, wiping tears from her golden eyes. The young soldier whose brother Danny had saved stood at attention. Proud and grateful.ky. Russ came to say goodbye personally. He pressed something into Danny's hand. It was a single golden scale, one of his own, a gift of the highest honor in Drakari culture. He told Danny that this scale would mark him as a friend of the Empire forever. Any Drakari who saw it would know that Danny was under the Emperor's protection. Danny thanked him and promised to hang it somewhere special. Kira walked with Danny to the shuttle. She had decided to stay with the Drakari a while longer to help with the new peace efforts. She said the galaxy was changing and she wanted to be part of it. But she made Danny promise to save her a seat at his diner. When she eventually came back to Earth, Danny promised. The shuttle ride home was quiet. Danny sat alone, looking out the window as the stars turned into streaks of light. He thought about everything that had happened, about the princes and the poisons and the impossible meals. He thought about how close humanity had come to enslavement without even knowing it, but mostly, he thought about his grandmother. He wished she could have seen him. He wished she could have known that her lessons about food and love had saved an entire planet. 2 days later, Danny walked into his diner for the first time in months. It was exactly as he had left it. The same cracked counter, the same worn stools, the same old radio sitting on the shelf. The locals who had been running the place while he was gone cheered when they saw him. They had watched the news. They knew something had happened on that alien ship, even if the details were classified. Danny did not tell them the full story. He just put on his apron, fired up the grill, and started cooking. That night, after the last customer left, Danny hung the golden scale above the grill. It caught the light and sparkled like a tiny sun. He made himself a simple meal, nothing fancy, just eggs and toast the way his grandmother used to make it. He ate alone in the quiet diner, but he did not feel lonely. Somewhere out there in the galaxy, Drakari cooks were learning to cook with love. Somewhere out there, an empire was changing because one human had refused to be afraid. Danny finished his meal, washed his plate, and started preparing for the breakfast rush. There would be hungry truckers in the morning, and pancakes would not flip themselves. His grandmother had been right all along. Food was magic. And Danny Hartwell, a nobody from Nebraska, had used that magic to change the universe. Not bad for a line cook.